They used Margaret Vale's translation,
6 years became 20,
then ordered her
only she
out
could
before anyone could question it. For 18 months, the Duke of Ashcombe had trusted her words in private, while letting his solicitor claim them in public. By noon the next day, one sealed agreement would save the harbour from its creditors or surrender its dues, ships, and future for 20 years. Margaret had already accepted a better post in London, with a carriage waiting and no reason to look back. Then a French envoy placed a bilingual counterpart in her hands. The two columns did not say the same thing. To expose the man who changed them, Margaret would have to return to the room that silenced her and make a duke admit what her quiet labour had truly been worth. Margaret Vale stood behind Gideon Rooke while he presented her translation as his own work. The long dining room overlooked Ashcombe Harbour, where lanterns moved between the warehouses and the tide-darkened quay. A dozen men had gathered to celebrate the agreement that was supposed to save the estate from its creditors. Margaret had spent 6 weeks translating the letters that made the dinner possible. She had corrected shipping dates, clarified repair obligations, and stopped 3 arguments before any of them reached the Duke. Yet her place was near the sideboard, between Edmund Harcourt's widowed aunt and the door to the drawing-room. Rooke lifted a page from the silver tray before him. The French delegation has accepted responsibility for restoring the eastern quay, he announced. He paused as though the sentence had been born in his own mind. They will also guarantee stable harbour charges during the work. Margaret looked at the paper in his hand. Those were her words. She had written them after midnight 2 days earlier, because Rooke had returned the first version without reading the French memorandum attached to it. Across the table, Monsieur Delacroix exchanged a glance with his younger associate. Then he turned toward Margaret. Madame Vale, may I ask how the maintenance charge will be separated from the harbour dues? Rooke answered before she could draw breath. Mrs. Vale is not responsible for commercial interpretation. Delacroix's bros rose. She translated the proposal. She rendered the language. Rooke said, "That is not the same as understanding the interests behind it." A few members of the family council smiled into their wine. Margaret kept her hands still against the charcoal fabric of her dress. The insult was familiar. The timing was not. Delacroix had asked about a distinction that should already have been clear in both versions. Margaret looked toward Edmund. The Duke sat at the head of the table beneath a portrait of his grandfather. He had spent the evening listening with the controlled weariness of a man who knew every candle had been purchased on credit. His estate needed the agreement. His tenants needed the harbour. His pride needed the room to believe he still commanded both. Margaret waited for him to say that she had prepared the commercial translation. Edmund mit Hergase. For one brief moment, she saw that he understood exactly what Rooke had done. Then he looked toward the drawing-room doors. Mrs. Vale, my sister will need assistance receiving the ladies. The words were calm. That made them worse. Margaret inclined her head. Of course. Your Grace. She crossed the room without haste. No one stopped her. Behind her, Rooke resumed speaking from the notes she had prepared. The drawing-room smelled of beeswax, dear, and the roses Edmund's sister had ordered from a greenhouse the estate could no longer afford to heat. Lady Anne Harcourt stood near the fireplace with 3 guests who had no interest in the harbour agreement. Margaret greeted them, corrected the tea service, and found a chair for an elderly baroness. She did each task well. Competence did not become less real because it was being used beneath its value. Lady Anne watched her arrange the cups. You should be in the dining room, she said quietly. I was asked to come here. My brother depends upon your judgment. Your brother depends upon my silence as well. Lady Anne lowered her eyes. Margaret softened her tone. But not the truth. Those are not the same service. The dining room doors opened 20 minutes later. The guests entered in small groups, pleased with themselves, and the agreement they believed had already been settled. Rook remained behind with Delacroix and the Duke. Margaret moved toward the corridor before the doors could close again. Delacroix stepped out first. He bowed to her with more respect than anyone at the table had shown. "Madame, the charge, Mr. Rook described was not in the language you sent us." Margaret felt the dry edge of the folded napkin in her hand. "Which charge do you mean, the harbour dues?" "My translation limited the syndicate's authority to repair costs on the Eastern Quay. That is what I understood." "And what did Mr. Rook describe tonight?" Delacroix glanced back toward the closed doors. "Something broader." Rook appeared behind him. "The carriage is waiting for you." "Monsieur?" Delacroix's expression tightened. He bowed again to Margaret and walked away. Rook waited until the Frenchman had reached the stairs. "You embarrassed the Duke." Margaret looked at him. "I did not speak." "You allowed a foreign merchant to suggest uncertainty." "He asked a question about my translation." "He asked because you have encouraged him to think you possess authority here." "I encouraged him to send clear documents." Rook stepped closer. His voice remained low enough to sound civilized. "You are here because Lady Anne required a companion who could manage correspondence. I am here because you could not answer the correspondence yourself." His face changed only slightly. That was enough. Margaret continued before he could interrupt. "I will not certify another translation unless I am permitted to see the final document. You will perform the duties for which you are paid." "My duties have changed whenever the estate needed work. No one wished to name." "You mistake usefulness for rank." "No." "Mr. Roke." Margaret held his gaze. "You mistake rank for accuracy." The dining room door opened again. Edmund emerged, with one hand pressed against the back of his neck. He looked from Margaret to Rook. "What has happened, Mrs.? Vale has decided to dictate the terms of her employment." Rook said. Margaret answered without raising her voice. "I asked to see the final agreement before confirming that its English and French versions matched." Edmund's hand fell. "Have you not seen it?" "I have seen every draft except the one prepared for signature." Rook gave a patient sigh. "The engrossed copy contains no material alteration." "Then there is no reason to keep it from me," Margaret said. Edmund looked toward the corridor where Delacroix had disappeared. "What did he ask you?" He said, "The harbour charge described tonight was not in the language I sent." Rook turned sharply. "A misunderstanding caused by conversation after wine. Then let me correct it before tomorrow. The agreement has already been reviewed." "By whom?" "By me." Margaret waited. Edmund did not rebuke Rook. He also did not dismiss the question. That small hesitation was the first useful thing he had offered her all evening. "Bring Mrs. Vale the working correspondence in the morning," he said. Rook's mouth tightened. "The signing is at noon." "Then she will begin early." Margaret looked at Edmund. "And the final copy." The Duke's exhaustion returned to his face. "We will discuss access after breakfast." It was not permission. It was another delay offered in the shape of fairness. Margaret nodded once. "Then I cannot confirm the translation tonight." She left them in the corridor. Her room occupied the narrow western side of the house, close enough to Lady Anne's apartments to preserve the fiction that companionship was her principal work. On the desk waited 4 shipping letters, a repair schedule, and a list of creditors who expected answers before morning. Margaret removed her silver brooch and placed it beside the inkstand. The brooch had belonged to her husband. He had never introduced her as his assistant, when illness had taken him. The merchants who once praised her judgment had begun addressing their letters to whichever man stood nearest. Ashcombe had been different only in scale. She opened the first shipping letter. A vessel from Calais had been charged 9 shillings per ton for temporary quay repairs. The agreed figure was 6. Margaret checked the copy beneath it. A Bristol vessel had been promised 5. A third letter quoted no repair charge at all, but listed a new harbour, due payable directly to an agent whose name she did not recognise. She arranged the 3 pages side by side. Different ships had received different figures for the same week. That was not a translation error. It was a system beginning to divide before the agreement had even been signed. At 7 the next morning, Margaret entered the estate office. The hearth was cold. Rook's clerk stood beside the contract cabinet with a ring of keys in his hand. "I was told the correspondence would be ready," Margaret said. The young man avoided her eyes. "Mr. Rook gave new instructions." He placed the keys inside his coat. Then he turned the cabinet lock until the iron clicked. "Nothing concerning the harbour is to leave this room." Margaret looked at the clerk's hand inside his coat. "Did Mr. Rook forbid me from reading the correspondence? Or only from removing it?" The young man hesitated. "He said nothing was to leave this room." Then placed the letters on the desk. His relief showed before he could hide it. He unlocked the cabinet again and carried 3 bundles to the central table. Margaret did not ask for the final agreement. Rook expected her to fight for it first. Instead, she opened the shipping correspondence she had already copied into the estate register. Every letter bore a date. Vessel, cargo, promised, charge, and answering signature. The clerk watched her arrange them in rows. "What are you looking for?" The point at which one agreement became several. She placed the Calais letter beside a Bristol notice. Both described repairs to the eastern quay. One charged 9 shillings per ton. The other charged 5. A third directed payment to an outside collection agent before any repairs had begun. Margaret tapped the 3 signatures. "Who answered these?" The clerk swallowed. "Mr. Rook approved them." "That was not my question." He leaned closer. The handwriting differed, but the same small mark appeared beside every total. It was a narrow hook of ink in the left margin. "The harbour cashier uses that mark when a figure has been entered into the dues book." The clerk said, "Has he entered these? I do not know." "Find out without warning him why." The young man looked toward the door. "Mr. Rook will dismiss me. He may dismiss you for obeying him badly or for telling the truth carefully." Margaret gathered the letters into their original order. Only one of those choices allows you to respect yourself afterward. The clerk left by the servants' passage. Margaret continued through the bundles. The inconsistency did not begin with the French syndicate. It began 6 weeks earlier, when Rook had asked her to translate a harmless inquiry about quay repairs. After that date, every answer passed through his private office before being copied into the estate register. Several replies carried phrases Margaret had never written. Temporary supervision became exclusive management. Repair reimbursement became harbour income. 6 years disappeared entirely from one draft and returned as a renewal period in another. The words were close enough to sound reasonable when read separately. Together, they formed a transfer of power. The office door opened at 7:30. Edmund entered without a servant. He wore the same navy coat from dinner. though the collar had been loosened and the shadows beneath his eyes had deepened. Rook said, "You refused your duties." "I refused to certify a document I have not seen." "He also said you accused him of fraud." "I accused no one." Margaret pushed the 3 shipping letters across the table. "I found 3 prices for 1 repair obligation." Edmund read the first letter, then the second. His expression sharpened at the third. "Who is Mercer Collection House? That is one of the questions your solicitor did not expect anyone to ask. Do they belong to Delacroix? Not according to any correspondence." I translated. Edmund looked toward the locked cabinet. "Why were these charges issued before the agreement? Because someone is behaving as though control has already changed hands." He read the letters again. "You believe Rook changed the terms?" "I believe the English descriptions moving through this office no longer match the French proposals." "That is not the same accusation." "No." Margaret met his gaze. "It is more useful." The Duke set the pages down. "What do you require?" It was the first time he had asked instead of instructed. Margaret did not reward the change with gratitude. "The final English agreement. Rook says it is with the copying clerk. Then the clerk can bring it. The sealed version may already be in the signing room. Then we will read it there." Edmund paced once toward the window. Below them, carts rolled along the quay with barrels of flour and lamp oil. Ashcombe Harbour served more than the estate. It fed 4 villages that had no road fit for winter wagons. "What happens if the language is, as you fear?" he asked. "The syndicate may control every Jew collected here. Not merely recover the cost of repairing the East Quay. For how long I cannot answer without the final copy. Estimate." Margaret's voice cooled. "That is how estates sign away property." He stopped pacing. The rebuke landed because it was deserved. "What can you answer?" "I can tell you the agreed proposal allowed 6 years of limited management during repairs. And the letters, they suggest someone has begun treating the harbour as though the authority were broader." Edmund pressed both hands against the table. "The creditors arrive before noon." "I know. If I delay the signing, they may demand immediate payment." "I know that as well. And if I sign the wrong agreement, you may save the estate for 1 season and lose its only reliable income for 20 years. The room went still. Edmund looked at her with none of the dismissal he had worn at dinner. "How did I not see this? Because every warning reached you through the man whose work it questioned." His mouth tightened. "And because I permitted that." Margaret said nothing. An apology spoken before action could become another convenience. The clerk returned through the side door. His face had lost its colour. The harbour cashier entered all 3 figures. Edmund turned. Under whose authority? The clerk removed a folded slip from his pocket. "Mr. Rook's standing instruction." Edmund took it. The instruction allowed temporary charges to be adjusted according to unspecified commercial conditions. It bore the Duke's signature. Margaret recognised the page. She had placed it among a stack of routine repair approvals 2 months earlier. The description at the top had then concerned warehouse roofing. Someone had replaced the first sheet while preserving the signed authorization beneath it. Edmund stared at his own name. "I signed this." "You signed the second page." Margaret said, "The first page is not the one I prepared." The clerk's breathing became audible. Edmund looked up. "Can that be proved? The estate copy may show different folding marks." Margaret examined the crease. The upper sheet had been folded twice. The signature page had been folded 3 times and carried a faint line of red dust from the warehouse office. It was suspicious. It was not the main proof. She set it down. This establishes that the approval deserves examination, but not who altered it. No. Then we still need the agreement. Rook entered before anyone could move. He closed the door behind him. I wondered how long it would take you to turn clerical confusion into theatre. Edmund held up the authorization. Why are harbour dues being collected under a warehouse repair approval? Rook barely glanced at the page. Emergency accounting measures. Authorized by whom? By you. Not in this form. Rook's eyes moved to Margaret. There is the danger of allowing a translator to imagine herself an advocate. Margaret folded her hands. There is the greater danger of allowing a solicitor to answer questions with insults. Edmund stepped between them. Bring the final agreement. It is being prepared. Bring the current version. The copying clerk is not finished. Then bring what he has. Rook's composure thinned. The creditors will interpret this disorder as weakness. They will interpret a 20-year surrender more harshly. For the first time, Rook looked genuinely surprised. Margaret saw the precise moment. He realized Edmund had listened to her. The solicitor recovered quickly. You are accepting speculation from a woman who has every reason to exaggerate her value. Margaret opened the register. These shipping charges were issued before I raised any objection. Rook did not look at them. The figures are provisional. To whom is Mercer Collection House accountable? A commercial agent. Owned by whom, that is irrelevant to translation. It is relevant to where Ashcombe's money is going. Rook turned to Edmund. This is what comes of confusing service with standing service. Edmund's answer came slowly. No. He looked at Margaret. This is what comes of denying standing to the person doing the work. The sentence did not repair 18 months. It changed the balance of the room. Rook heard it too. A knock sounded at the outer door. A footman entered, carrying a sealed envelope marked with the Delacroix crest. This arrived from the harbour inn. Rook extended his hand. The footman hesitated. The messenger gave a specific instruction. Sir. What instruction? The footman looked past him toward Margaret. The enclosed counterpart is to be delivered only to Mrs. Vale. The footman crossed the office and placed the sealed envelope in Margaret's hands. Rook moved at once. That document concerns the estate. Margaret turned the crest toward Edmund. It concerns the estate because the syndicate believes I am responsible for comparing its language. You are employed by Ashcombe. Rook said, I am employed to perform work. You denied me the authority to complete. Edmund held out one hand. Not for the envelope, but toward Rook. Stand where you are. Rook stopped. The command was quiet enough to leave him no respectable reason to resist. Margaret examined the wax. The Delacroix crest was unbroken. A second seal belonged to the merchant house that had witnessed the negotiations in Calais. She slid a narrow paper knife beneath the fold. Inside lay a letter and a document bound with blue ribbon. 2 columns ran down every page. French stood on the left. English stood on the right. Margaret did not begin with the disputed clause. She checked the title, Date, names, and description of the property. Then she compared the seals with those listed in the covering letter. This is a counterpart prepared after the final negotiations 6 days ago, she said. Who signed it? Edmund asked. Monsieur Delacroix and his commercial witness. Did anyone from Ashcombe sign no? Rook gave a short breath of contempt. Then it has no authority here. Margaret unfolded the covering letter. It was sent for review before Ashcombe placed its signature on the matching copy. Rook stepped closer, despite Edmund's warning. May I see that No. His face hardened. Margaret continued reading. The syndicate requested confirmation that both language columns remained identical before the noon signing. Edmund looked toward Rook. Why was this not sent to you? Rook's answer came too quickly, because Delacroix has allowed Mrs. Vale to believe she represents the estate. Margaret lifted her eyes from the page. He sent it to the person who translated the agreed terms. You translated drafts. I translated the last version both parties approved. You have no legal authority to judge what was approved. I do not need legal authority to determine whether two sentences say the same thing. The clerk lowered his gaze to hide a reaction. Edmund came around the table. Show me the section concerning the Eastern Quay. Margaret placed the counterpart flat beneath the window. Cold morning light fell across the paper. The French paragraph allowed the syndicate to oversee repair expenditures on the East Quay for 6 years. It allowed repayment from a defined portion of the quay's commercial income. It did not grant authority over the western docks. It did not grant control of harbour schedules. It did not mention automatic renewal. Margaret read the English column aloud. The language matched. Edmund listened without interruption. This is the agreement I expected, he said. It is the agreement the correspondence supports. Rook folded his arms. Then there is no dispute. There is a dispute, Margaret said. The version described at dinner included stable harbour charges under syndicate management. A summary is not a contract. The shipping notices already direct new dues to an outside collector. Temporary measures. Based upon what authority? Commercial necessity. Margaret turned another page. Then the final Ashcombe copy should contain no broader language than this counterpart. It does not. Bring it. Rook looked at Edmund. The Duke did not rescue him. Bring the copy. Edmund said. The clerk has not finished. Then we will wait beside his desk. That would humiliate him. It would protect the estate. Rook's jaw tightened. You are allowing panic to displace judgment. Edmund's gaze moved to the document. For 18 months. Judgment entered this house through Mrs. Vale, and left under your name. No one spoke. The clerk stared at the floor. Margaret felt the truth of the sentence without accepting it as payment. Edmund turned to her. Can you keep the counterpart secure? Yes. Do so. Rook reached for the document. Margaret closed it before his fingers touched the paper. You will not remove this from the office, he said. I will not surrender it to the only man refusing comparison. You have no right to retain commercial papers. The sender addressed it to me. As an employee of Ashcombe. As Margaret Vale. Rook looked at Edmund. Order her to hand it over. Edmund did not answer immediately. Margaret watched the struggle move across his face. Command would be easier. Trust required him to accept that he had created the conditions for doubt. What risk is there if Mrs. Vale holds it, he asked. Rook's restraint cracked. She could alter it. Margaret turned the seals toward the Duke. Both seals crossed the ribbon and the paper. The clerk leaned forward despite himself. Any page removed would break them. Rook looked at him. The young man stepped back. Margaret retied the blue ribbon without disturbing the wax. The document can be compared in the presence of both delegations, she said. No private copy is required. Edmund nodded. Mrs. Vale will retain it until the signing. Rook's face became still. It was not surrender. It was calculation. Then I must prepare the creditors for delay. He said, There is no delay, yet. Edmund replied, You have introduced doubt into an agreement they consider settled. I did not introduce it. Edmund looked toward the locked cabinet. I finally allowed it to be spoken. Rook bowed with perfect formality. Your Grace. He left the office without requesting the correspondence. The clerk exhaled only after the door closed. Margaret placed the counterpart inside her dispatch case. The case was dark leather, worn smooth at the corners. With a small brass lock, her husband had once carried shipping invoices in it between Dover and Calais. Who has another key? Edmund asked. No one. Where will you keep it with me? You should place it in the estate safe. Margaret closed the lock. The estate safe is accessible to Mr. Hurd. Roke. Edmund did not argue. That mattered more than agreement spoken without cost. The clerk gathered the shipping letters. Margaret stopped him. Leave the 3 inconsistent notices here. Rook's folded authorization remained beside them. The false first page and the old signature page could support an inquiry later. They could not decide the signing. The counterpart could. Margaret wrote the time of delivery on the envelope. She noted the names of everyone present. Then she asked the footman to sign that he had delivered it, sealed and directly into her hands. Edmund watched her complete the record. You expected someone to challenge its custody. I expected someone to challenge me. The Duke looked away. I gave them reason to believe that would succeed. Yes. He accepted the answer without defence. A bell sounded from the harbour road. The first creditor's carriage had arrived hours earlier than expected. The clerk hurried toward the window. Mr. Rook must have sent for them before dawn. Edmund's expression darkened. He wants the signing completed before questions spread. Margaret returned the envelope to the case. You must postpone it until the documents are compared. If I postpone without presenting evidence, the creditors may call the debt, then present the counterpart. They may argue it is not binding. It does not need to be binding. Margaret secured the key beneath her cuff. It only needs to prove that the agreement they negotiated is not the agreement someone intends you to sign. A knock struck the door. This time, Rook entered with 2 members of the family council behind him. Lady Whitcomb, Edmund's aunt, looked first at Margaret and then at the dispatch case. We are told confidential papers have been taken by a companion. Margaret remained beside the window. They were delivered to me by their sender. Rook placed a hand over his heart as though patience required physical support. Mrs. Vale refuses to return them. I refuse to give them to you. Lady Whitcomb stiffened. You forget your position. No. Margaret's voice remained even. I have remembered it with painful accuracy. The older woman turned to Edmund. This woman cannot remain in the house after speaking to your solicitor in that manner. Edmund looked at Margaret. For one moment, she wondered whether his recognition would survive an audience. Then Rook spoke before him. Dismiss her now, and I will restore order before the creditors enter. Margaret heard the offer clearly. Rook was not asking for discipline. He was asking for control of the proof. She rested one hand on the dispatch case. You may dismiss me, she said to Edmund, but the counterpart will remain in my custody until Monsieur Delacroix confirms who has the right to receive it. Lady Whitcomb stared. You would hold the Duke's negotiations hostage? No. Margaret met Rook's eyes. I would prevent his solicitor from burying the only document he fears enough to seize. Rook's hand fell from his chest. Lady Whitcomb looked toward the 2 council members as though Margaret had confirmed every warning ever spoken about women who worked beyond their station. Edmund remained between Margaret and the door. No one will touch the dispatch case. he said. His aunt drew herself upright. You cannot allow a paid companion to command the room. She is not commanding it. Margaret watched his face. He believed he was defending her. He still could not name what she was doing. Rook recognized the weakness at once. Then perhaps your grace will explain her authority. Edmund's silence lasted one breath too long. Margaret felt the entire structure reveal itself. The Duke trusted her conclusion. He relied upon her custody. He still had no office, rule, or public standing under which to place either trust. Lady Whitcomb turned that absence into a verdict. There is none. Margaret closed the clasp on the dispatch case. That is precisely the problem. One of the council members, Sir Alton Briggs, stepped toward the table. He had invested in 2 warehouses and feared the creditors more than he feared a dishonest agreement. We are discussing words while the estate approaches default, he said. Words decide who collects the income after default is avoided. Margaret replied. Briggs frowned. You are not a solicitor. No. Then you cannot interpret legal consequence. I can interpret the sentence that creates it. Rook gave a weary smile. A distinction designed to preserve her importance. Margaret turned to Edmund. Ask him to state the term of syndicate control. Rook's smile disappeared. Edmund looked at him. How long the final period reflects the security required by the investment? That was not my question. Rook adjusted one cuff. Commercial agreements require flexibility. How long? Mr. Rook. Lady Whitcomb interrupted. Edmund. This interrogation is undignified. So was allowing 3 harbour charges to be issued under one approval. Rook's gaze sharpened. You have seen no proof that I issued them. The instruction bears my signature beneath a replaced first sheet. That is an allegation based on folding marks. It is a question based on my own document. Rook moved nearer the Duke. The creditors are already gathering. His voice softened into the tone of an old adviser protecting an inexperienced heir. If the signing fails today, they may seize the western warehouses before the week is over. Edmund looked through the window. More carriages were turning into the estate drive. Men who had ignored Ashcombe for years had arrived early to witness whether its Duke would keep his word. Rook followed his gaze. You can preserve the harbour now and investigate clerical differences afterward. Margaret understood the offer. Once the seal was placed, every disputed word would become an obligation instead of a warning. There will be no afterward with equal leverage, she said. Briggs struck the table with 2 fingers. And there may be no estate without the signing. Margaret faced him. If Ashcombe gives away the harbour income, the estate will survive only long enough to watch someone else collect it. Lady Whitcomb's mouth tightened. You speak as though you alone understand sacrifice. No. Margaret rested one hand on the worn leather case. I speak as someone who knows the difference between sacrifice and surrender. Edmund looked at her. The room held for a moment. Then another council member, Lord Fenwick, cleared his throat. We require an orderly solution. Margaret almost smiled. Order was the name powerful people gave to delay, when delay protected them. Fenwick continued. Mrs. Vale may retain the document until Monsieur Delacroix arrive. Rook inclined his head as though conceding something reasonable. But she should not attend the signing. Margaret looked toward him. He had changed tactics. If he could not take the proof, he would separate it from the person able to explain it. Briggs nodded. That would prevent further disturbance. Edmund's expression hardened. She must compare the documents. She may prepare a written note. Rook said. Margaret answered before Edmund could. A note can be summarized by the man it questions. Rook's eyes remained on the Duke. Your Grace must choose whether this house is governed by its council or by an employee who refuses instruction. Edmund's jaw tightened. Margaret saw the trap. If he chose her openly, he would have to challenge the entire structure that had kept Rook powerful. If he chose the council, he could still tell himself he intended to investigate later. She knew which choice a tired man under debt was most likely to call responsible. Edmund turned to the council. Mrs. Vale will compare the documents before the signing. Lady Whitcomb opened her mouth. He raised a hand. She will do so privately with me and Mr. Rook present. Margaret felt no triumph. Private reliance was the cage she had occupied for 18 months. Rook lowered his gaze to conceal satisfaction, and afterward Margaret asked. Edmund looked at her. If the language differs materially, the signing stops, and if it does not, you will return the counterpart and resume your duties. The terms were calm. They were also revealing. Her authority would exist only long enough to protect his decision. Afterward, she would become a companion again. Margaret lifted the dispatch case. I will compare the documents. Rook exhaled. But I will not resume duties under the same arrangement. Edmund's attention sharpened. This is not the time to negotiate employment. It became the time when you required my judgment without granting me standing. Lady Whitcomb stepped forward. You are threatening the Duke while his estate is in danger. No. Margaret looked at Edmund rather than his aunt. I am telling him the cost of continuing to mistake dependence for respect. Rook gave a quiet laugh. There it is. He turned toward the council. The demand beneath the concern. Margaret faced him. You have taken my work, restricted my access, and questioned my character. Her voice did not rise. I am not demanding advancement from you. She turned back to Edmund. I am withdrawing consent to remain diminished for your convenience. The Duke flinched as though the sentence had found a private wound. Before he could answer, a maid appeared at the open door. She held a small envelope on a tray. This came for Mrs. Vale from the London coach office. Margaret recognised the seal of Bellamy and Cross. Rook looked at it. His suspicion became alarm. Edmund noticed. Give it to her. The maid crossed the room. Margaret opened the envelope. The merchant house confirmed her appointment as commercial translator. Her rooms would be ready the following evening. A seat had been reserved on the 8 o'clock carriage. The letter requested only her signature and arrival. Nothing in it depended upon Ashcombe. Nothing in it called her companion. Edmund watched her read. What is it? A position in London. Lady Whitcomb made a sound of disbelief. You sought other employment while living under this roof. I sought it after Mr. Rook refused to show me the document my name would certify. Rook recovered first. A convenient performance. Margaret handed the letter to Edmund. He read the title twice. Commercial translator. Not assistant. Not companion. Not useful woman behind a door. His gaze moved to the salary. Then to the clause giving her authority to reject incomplete work. When did you accept I have not signed yet? Relief crossed his face before he could stop it. Margaret saw it, and closed the distance between them with the truth. I will sign today. The relief vanished. Margaret. It was the first time he had used her name before the council. It came too late to carry authority over her choice. The signing is tomorrow, he said. Then compare the documents today. You know I may need you here. You have needed me here for 18 months. The room became very quiet. That did not prevent you from keeping me beneath the work. Edmund folded the London letter along its original crease. What would make you stay? Margaret considered the question. A week earlier, she might have answered with title, access, and salary. Now any offer made under pressure would bind her future to his immediate fear. I will not bargain for dignity beside a disputed contract. She took the letter back. I will complete the comparison because the harbour deserves the truth. Her fingers closed around the paper. After that, I am leaving Ashcombe. Margaret signed the London letter before anyone in the council room found an argument she had not already survived. She folded it once and asked the maid to place it with the outgoing post. Edmund watched the envelope leave his house. He did not order, it returned. That restraint did not absolve him. But it was the first proof that he understood her departure belonged to her. Rook recovered his voice. The comparison must begin immediately. Margaret rested the dispatch case against her hip. The final Ashcombe copy is still unavailable. It will be ready this afternoon. You said it was nearly complete before breakfast. Legal copying requires care. So does altering a negotiated term without being noticed. Lady Whitcomb drew a sharp breath. Rook's expression flattened. Edmund stepped toward the door. We will go to the copying room now. Rook did not move. The creditors are waiting. They can wait while I learn what I am expected to sign. Briggs objected that delay would look like weakness. Edmund opened the door himself. Signing what I have not read would be weakness. Margaret followed him through the corridor. Rook came behind them because refusing would have exposed more than obedience cost him. The copying room occupied a narrow chamber above the estate office. 2 clerks sat beneath a high window, surrounded by sandshakers, blotting paper, and stacks of folded parchment. The senior clerk rose when the Duke entered. Edmund looked across the desks. Where is the harbour agreement? The man glanced toward Rook. Rook answered for him. The formal copy is being sealed in the signing room. Margaret heard the lie before the clerk lowered his eyes. When did it leave this room? She asked. The clerk swallowed. Before dawn. Edmund turned toward Rook. You told me it was unfinished. I said the copying clerk had not finished his work. The document left before we entered the office. There were supporting sheets to prepare. Margaret placed the dispatch case on an empty desk. Who carried the agreement downstairs? The senior clerk looked ill. Mr. Rook took it. Rook's voice became dangerous. You will answer only the Duke. Edmund looked at the clerk. You will answer Mrs. Vale's question. The room shifted around that permission. The clerk pressed his palms against the desk. Mr. Rook collected the agreement at 5 this morning. Was it already bound? Margaret asked. Yes. Were both language versions attached? The clerk looked toward the French pages stacked beside him. No. Margaret opened the dispatch case, but did not remove the counterpart. What were you instructed to copy? Only the English agreement. From which draft? The clerk pointed toward a wastebasket near the hearth. Rook stepped between Margaret and it. Discarded sheets cannot establish anything. They can establish what the clerk was asked to read, she said. Edmund moved to the basket first. Inside lay practice pages, trimmed ribbon, and a torn sheet bearing half a clause. The surviving words referred to exclusive collection rights. The remainder had been burned. Margaret did not treat the fragment as proof. Its meaning depended upon missing language. She looked at the clerk instead. Did the copy include authority over the entire harbour? The clerk's eyes moved to Edmund. Yes. Your Grace. For how long? Edmund asked. 20 years. The Duke closed his hand around the torn page. Rook spoke before the silence could settle. The longer term secured a lower interest rate. Who approved it? Edmund asked. The creditors required stronger security. That is not an answer. The council authorized necessary amendments. Briggs, who had followed them upstairs, stared at Rook. We authorized negotiation. Rook did not look at him. You authorized me to preserve the estate. Margaret locked the dispatch case again. The counterpart limits management to 6 years, and the Eastern Key. Rook turned on her. The counterpart is not the final instrument. It records the final terms agreed by the syndicate. It records what their envoy prefers to remember. Their seals remember with him. Edmund placed the torn page on the desk. The signing stops until Delacroix confirms the counterpart. Rook's posture remained formal, but the colour left his face. You cannot stop now. I can refuse to seal a document. The creditors will call the debt. Then they will explain why repayment requires surrendering income that was never offered. Rook lowered his voice. You are allowing one woman's resentment to destroy generations of property. Margaret met his gaze. My resentment did not write 20 years into that agreement. Edmund looked toward the senior clerk. No copy leaves this room. Then he faced Rook. You will surrender every key connected to the harbour files. Rook gave a humourless smile. On the authority of a companion, on mine. The words were firm. They still placed Margaret's truth beneath his power. She felt the distinction clearly. Rook removed 2 keys and set them on the desk. He kept one hand closed. Margaret noticed the pressure of metal beneath his glove. The signing room key, as well, she said. Rook looked at her. Edmund held out his hand. After a moment, Rook placed the 3rd key in the Duke's palm. You will regret humiliating the man who kept this estate solvent. Margaret answered before Edmund could. The estate is not solvent. She lifted the dispatch case. It has merely been kept too confused to know who profits from its weakness. Rook's face tightened. He left without bowing. Edmund ordered 2 servants to guard the copying room and sent Briggs to inform the creditors that the noon signing was under review. Lady Whitcomb remained near the stairs. This scandal will destroy confidence. Margaret looked at her. Confidence built on silence deserves examination. The older woman turned away. By late afternoon, the disputed English agreement had been removed from the signing room and placed under guard. Margaret compared it with the sealed counterpart while Edmund and 2 clerks witnessed every page. 4 phrases had changed. Each alteration expanded the syndicate's authority. Together, they transferred control of every harbour due, every vessel schedule, and every repair contract for 20 years. The final clause renewed that authority automatically, unless Ashcombe repaid the full investment within 30 days of the term's end. Edmund read the sentence twice. This would make repayment nearly impossible. Yes. And the estate would remain responsible for the harbour debt. Yes. He sat at the end of the table. For the first time since Margaret had known him, he looked less like a duke under pressure than a man confronting the cost of what he had chosen not to see. I should have asked you to review the final copy from the beginning. You should have given the work an office that could not be locked out of the room. He nodded. I knew Rook used your summaries. You knew he presented them as his. Edmund looked down. Yes, the admission arrived without excuse. Margaret waited. I told myself, the arrangement spared you conflict with the council. He said, It spared you conflict with the council. Yes. His voice roughened. I accepted your competence where it served me and ignored the conditions under which you provided it. Margaret closed the English agreement. That is accurate. I am sorry. She believed him. Belief was not the same as repair. Thank you for saying it plainly. What would repair it? You cannot repair 18 months before tomorrow morning. I can begin, not by asking me to stay. Edmund's eyes lifted. Margaret placed the sealed counterpart back in her case. If you offer authority while the harbour depends on my answer, neither of us will know whether you value my judgment or fear losing it. I do fear losing it. That is reliance. She fastened the clasp. It is not yet respect. He accepted the distinction. What will you do with the counterpart? Carry it to London after the public comparison. You still intend to leave? Yes. The creditors may demand another meeting. Then establish a process that does not depend on whether I remain in your house. Edmund stood. I will not stop you. Margaret looked at him. The words cost him something. That made them useful. You will have the estate carriage at 8. He continued. The driver will take you to the coach connection, and the horses will remain available if you choose another route. No garde. No guard. No servant instructed to report where I go. No. And my letters will not pass through Rook's office. They will leave sealed under your name. Margaret inclined her head. That is a beginning. At dusk. Delacroix sent word that he would attend the formal comparison at noon the next day. The creditors agreed to delay the signing until then. Rook remained in the house but was barred from the harbour records. Margaret packed before midnight. She placed 3 dresses in her trunk, wrapped her silver brooch in linen, and kept the dispatch case beside her chair. Lady Anne came to the doorway. I wish I had spoken at dinner. So do I. The younger woman's face tightened. I was afraid of my aunt. Fear explains silence. Margaret closed the trunk. It does not carry its consequence for us. Lady Anne nodded through the rebuke. Will you return? No. The answer hurt them both. But Margaret would not soften it into uncertainty. At 8 the next morning, Edmund stood beside the carriage. He had brought no flowers and made no final appeal. He handed Margaret a packet containing her unpaid professional wages, the London letter Rook had tried to intercept, and a written acknowledgement that the dispatch case belonged to her. I calculated the difference between a companion's salary and the commercial work recorded under your hand. He said, This is not payment for staying. Margaret checked the papers. No, it is payment long overdue. She placed the packet beside her. Edmund stepped away from the carriage door. The signing remains at noon. Monsieur Delacroix has the counterpart details. He has his own knowledge. He does. Neither pretended that anyone else could explain Ashcombe's correspondence as she could. Margaret entered the carriage. Edmund did not touch the door until she had settled. May I write to you in London? He asked. Not yet. He nodded once. The carriage rolled down the drive. At the first posting station, Margaret changed horses while the driver carried her travel papers inside. A harbour boy arrived on a lathered pony and shouted for the Ashcombe coachman. He carried a notice bearing the estate seal. Rook had convinced 2 creditors that delay constituted default. The signing had been moved from noon to 10. Margaret looked at the station clock. The London coach would arrive in 12 minutes. Ashcombe lay less than an hour behind her. She could continue toward the office that had named her profession correctly. She could send the counterpart with the boy and trust a room of men to understand what Rook had spent 18 months teaching them not to hear. Margaret closed the carriage door. Then she leaned toward the driver. Turn the horses around. The driver pulled hard on the reins, and the carriage turned across the muddy posting yard. The London coach appeared at the far end of the road as Margaret began travelling back toward Ashcombe. She watched it pass through the window. Its painted door carried the name of the city where a private room, a professional title, and a safer future waited for her. For one sharp moment, she felt the cost of her decision as clearly as the weight of the dispatch case against her knees. Then she remembered the dock workers who had loaded winter flour beneath 3 different schedules because no one had been permitted to question the figures. She remembered the tenant merchants who would discover too late that every fee, berth, and repair contract had passed into outside control. She had not turned back for Edmund. She had turned back because silence would make her work part of the deception. The harbour boy rode beside the carriage until the road narrowed. "Who gave you the notice?" Margaret asked through the open window. "Mr. Rook's clerk." "Ma'am." "The young clerk from the estate office." "No." "Ma'am?" The boy shook his head. "A man from the solicitor's private room." "Did he say why the hour changed?" "He said the creditors would seize the warehouses if the Duke did not seal the agreement at 10. Margaret looked at the notice again. The estate seal was genuine. The language above it was not an order from Edmund. It merely stated that the creditors had requested an immediate conclusion. Rook had turned a demand into an instruction, and an instruction into inevitability. "Ride to the Harbour Inn." Margaret said, "Tell Monsieur Delacroix, the signing has been moved." The boy glanced toward the estate road. "Mr." Rook said no one was to trouble the French gentleman. "That is why you must trouble them." She removed a silver coin from her purse. "Ask Monsieur Delacroix to bring the witness named on the counterpart." The boy took the coin. "And the harbour master," she added. "Tell him the Duke may be asked to surrender collection authority over every key." The boy's eyes widened. "Will he understand? He will understand what that means to every ship entering Ashcombe." The boy turned his pony toward the lower road. Margaret closed the window. The driver urged the horses faster. They reached the estate gates at 28 minutes past 9. The iron barriers were closed. A footman stood inside with 2 unfamiliar men, wearing the plain dark coats of private security hired by creditors. The driver called for the gates to open. The footman did not move. "Mrs. Vale is no longer employed at Ashcombe," he said. Margaret stepped down from the carriage with the dispatch case in one hand. "I am not asking to enter as an employee. The house is closed during the signing. The document inside this case was requested by one of the signing parties." The older guard approached the bars. "Mr. Rook gave orders that no commercial papers were to enter or leave." Margaret almost admired the completeness of the sentence. Rook had converted custody into suspicion. "Did the Duke give that order?" she asked. "We answer to the creditors today. Then the creditors should know why their agreement cannot survive comparison." The guard looked toward the house. The clock above the stable roof showed 32 minutes past 9. Margaret placed the case on the stone gatepost and opened the outer pocket. She removed Edmund's written acknowledgement that the case and its contents remained under her custody. The guard read the signature. "That does not grant entry." "No." Margaret folded the paper again. "It proves Mr. Rook lied when he called this estate property." The footman's expression changed. He had served dinner the night Margaret was sent from the room. He knew who had prepared every packet placed before the guests. "I can carry a message to His Grace," he said. "You may carry one sentence." Margaret looked directly at him. "Tell him Margaret Vale, returned by choice. And Gideon Rook has moved the seal before the agreed witness can arrive." The footman hurried toward the house. The guards remained at the gate. Margaret did not plead with them. She checked the lock on the dispatch case and watched the minute hand move. At 9:38, Lady Anne appeared on the front steps without a cloak. She crossed the drive quickly, followed by the footman. "Open the gate," she said. The older guard shook his head. "Mr. Rook's instructions were explicit. My brother owns this estate. The creditors hold the warehouse notes." Lady Anne reached the bars. "Margaret, they have confined Edmund to the signing room with the council. Confined not by force." Lady Anne caught her breath. By consequence, the creditors had placed notices of seizure on the western warehouses and threatened to dismiss the dock workers before noon. Rook claimed the notices would be withdrawn the moment the seal was placed. "Has Edmund seen the final document?" Margaret asked. "He saw the disputed copy yesterday." "Then why has he not refused?" "He has refused twice." Lady Anne lowered her voice. "Rook says refusal now will make the debt immediately payable under an older agreement. Has anyone seen that agreement? Rook produced it this morning." Margaret felt the old pattern closing around the Duke. A new threat had appeared through the same man, controlling access to its explanation. "Tell Edmund not to debate the older debt," she said. "Tell him to ask who certified that it becomes payable today." Lady Anne gripped the gate. "Come inside and tell him yourself. The gate is locked." Lady Anne turned toward the guard. "You will open it." "I cannot." "Milady." "Then I will remain outside with Mrs. Vale when the warehouses are seized." The guard stared at her. Lady Anne had spent her life obeying the quiet rules of the house. Her decision did not carry legal authority. It carried social consequence. A creditor could bar a dismissed employee, barred alongside the Duke's sister. She became visible. The guard reached reluctantly for the chain. Before he could remove it, a carriage approached from the harbour road. Monsieur Delacroix sat inside with his younger associate and the commercial witness named on the counterpart. The harbour master rode behind them. Delacroix stepped down before the wheels had stopped. "Why were we told the signing remained at noon?" he asked. Margaret held up Rook's notice. "Because Mr. Rook did not intend you to arrive before the seal." The commercial witness moved toward the gate. "I am a party to the comparison." The guards exchanged a glance. Preventing Margaret could be described as household discipline. Preventing the foreign delegation from attending its own signing could not. The older guard unlocked the chain. Margaret entered with the dispatch case still in her hand. She did not thank him. The group crossed the drive as the estate clock marked 10:15. Inside the entrance hall, creditors' clerks carried bundles toward the signing room. Rook stood at the foot of the staircase directing them. He saw Margaret and stopped speaking. "You abandoned your position," he said. "I resigned from it. You removed confidential property. The Duke acknowledged the case as mine. You have no standing in this negotiation." Delacroix came beside her. "She holds the counterpart my house requested her to compare." Rook looked at him. "You agreed to the revised security." "I agreed to repairs on the East Quay. The English instrument reflects necessary protections." "Then you will not object to hearing both versions read." Rook's control slipped for one instant. "The creditors have no time for another performance." The harbour master stepped forward. "They will have less time when every captain learns Ashcombe negotiated away the western berths without notice." Rook turned to the guards. "Remove Mrs. Vale." Neither man moved. They had admitted her beside the signing party and the harbour officer. Removing her now would require an authority Rook could no longer imitate. Margaret walked toward the long corridor. Rook followed. Your London employers will hear that you interfered in a legal proceeding. They will hear I refuse to certify unequal documents. You will lose the position. Perhaps. Margaret did not slow. That is the cost I chose before returning. He moved ahead and blocked the signing room doors. You imagine this makes you honourable? No. She met his eyes. It makes me responsible for what my work permits. The doors opened from inside. Edmund stood on the other side. Relief crossed his face when he saw her. He did not reach for her or ask why she had returned. His eyes went first to the dispatch case. Is the counterpart secure? Yes. Did anyone else handle it? No. He stepped aside. The creditors are prepared to withdraw the warehouse notices only after the agreement is sealed. Have they compared the 6-year limitation? They were told it no longer applies. By Rook, yes. Margaret entered the signing room. The family council sat along one side of the long table. 3 creditors sat on the other. The disputed English agreement lay in the centre beside the Ashcombe seal. Every person who had dismissed her at dinner could now see the charcoal dress they had sent from the room. Briggs rose halfway from his chair. Why is she here? Margaret placed the dispatch case on the table. To answer the question, none of you allowed me to finish. Rook entered behind her. The signing must proceed. He crossed to the centre of the table before Edmund could stop him. Then Gideon Rook lifted the estate seal above the waiting wax. Put it down, Margaret said. Rook kept the seal above the wax. You have no authority to interrupt this proceeding. Margaret opened the dispatch case. I have the authority of the document your proceeding intends to contradict. One creditor pushed back his chair. We have already lost an hour to household disputes. This is not a household dispute, Margaret said. It concerns the income securing your debt. That stopped him. Edmund moved beside the table, set down the seal. Rook looked from the Duke to the creditors. If the agreement is not executed now, the warehouse notices remain in force. Then they remain, Edmund said. A murmur moved through the council. Rook lowered the seal only far enough to rest it beside the wax. Margaret removed the bilingual counterpart from the case. The blue ribbon remained tight. Both seals remained unbroken across paper and binding. She placed it in the centre of the table without handing it to anyone. Monsieur Delacroix and his witness approached. Is this the document your house prepared? Margaret asked. Delacroix examined the outer page. Yes. Was it sealed before delivery? Yes. Has the ribbon been disturbed? The witness leaned close. No. Did your house intend the French and English columns to contain equal obligations? Precisely equal. Margaret turned toward the creditors. The disputed agreement grants rights that do not appear here. Rook folded his arms. A negotiation may change after a counterpart is prepared. Then the change requires the knowledge of both parties. The syndicate required stronger security. Delacroix looked at him. We required repayment from East Quay income. You accepted full harbour control. I did not. Rook gave a thin smile. You may wish to reconsider what your representatives agreed. The witness stepped forward. I attended every final session. Rook did not look at him. Margaret untied the document without breaking either seal. She opened it to the marked clause. The French text permits the syndicate to supervise repair expenditures on the Eastern Quay for 6 years. She read the sentence slowly in French. Then she gave the English column exactly as written. Management of repair expenditures on the Eastern Quay for a period not exceeding 6 years. She placed one finger beneath the location. Eastern Key. Her finger moved to the term 6 years. Then she looked toward the separate English instrument waiting beside the estate seal. May I open the agreement prepared for His Grace's signature? Edmund nodded. You may. Rook stepped forward. That copy is under legal custody. Edmund turned. Whose custody? Rook did not answer. Margaret opened the disputed agreement. She found the matching section and read it aloud. Exclusive administration of all harbour dues. Vessel schedules. Commercial berths. And repair contracts for 20 years. The harbour master swore beneath his breath. One creditor reached for the paper. Margaret kept her palm on its edge. You may examine it after the comparison is complete. The man stared at her. At dinner. He had not known her name. Now he waited. Margaret continued. The location changed from one quay to the entire harbour. She turned a page. The term changed from 6 years to 20. Another page followed. The authority changed from repair oversight to control of income. Berths, schedules, and contracts. She reached the final clause, and the agreement renews automatically unless Ashcombe repays the complete investment within 30 days of expiration. Briggs leaned forward. That clause was never presented to the council. Rook answered him. The council authorised amendments necessary to secure credit. We authorised negotiation. Briggs said. We did not authorise surrender. The first creditor looked toward Delacroix. Did your syndicate request these terms? No, Delacroix said. The answer landed harder than anger. Rook shifted tactics. Whether the syndicate requested them is less important than whether the estate requires them. Margaret turned toward him. Who inserted the changes? The copying office prepared the final instrument. Under whose instruction? Mine. There was no confession in his tone, only professional entitlement. Margaret kept the focus narrow. When did you receive authority from Delacroix to expand the property? The counterpart was provisional. Where is the written amendment? There was no need for one. When did Edmund approve 20 years? His council granted discretion. Which recorded decision granted it? Rook's eyes hardened. You are conducting a legal examination without qualification. No. Margaret placed her finger beside the altered clause. I am asking who changed words after 2 parties agreed upon them. Rook turned to the Duke. This spectacle proves my concern. What concern? Edmund asked. That Mrs. Vale's resentment has overcome her judgment. Margaret did not defend her motives. She lifted the sealed counterpart. Is this the document Delacroix's house approved? Yes, Delacroix said. She touched the disputed agreement. Did they approve this language? No. She faced Rook again. Did Edmund approve it? Rook looked toward the Duke. Edmund's voice remained controlled. I did not. Margaret turned to Briggs. Did the council approve it? No. She looked at the creditors. Did any of you require the syndicate to control vessel schedules and western berths? The oldest creditor shook his head. Our concern was security over repair income. Margaret rested both hands on the table. Then the language has no acknowledged source except the man who controlled the final draft. Rook's face tightened. You have proved that the document changed. Yes. You have not proved corruption. I do not need to prove every purpose today. Margaret's voice carried to the far end of the room. I need to prove that this agreement cannot be signed as the expression of informed consent. No one challenged the conclusion. Rook looked toward the estate seal. Margaret moved it beyond his reach. He stared at her hand. You presume too much. For 18 months. You presumed no one would ask me what the words meant. The family council went still. Margaret did not look at Edmund. This was not the moment for his approval. She faced the people who had accepted her labour while denying her voice. At dinner, Mr. Rook said I could render language but could not understand the interests behind it. She opened the disputed agreement wider. These words would decide which ships entered this harbour. She turned another page. They would decide who collected every due. Another page. They would decide which merchants received berths and which families lost work. Her gaze moved across the table. That is not decorative language. It is authority. Rook tried once more. You are still only an employee. Margaret looked directly at him. I resigned. The word stripped away his last familiar weapon. She was no longer protecting wages he controlled or a room he could take from her. She had returned with somewhere else to go. The oldest creditor leaned toward the counterpart. Mrs. Vale, can the original 6-year agreement still secure our position? Rook opened his mouth. Edmund spoke first. This question belongs to Mrs. Vale. He stepped away from the head of the table. The movement was small. Its meaning was not. Margaret stood where every summary had once passed over her shoulder into Rook's hands. Now, the Duke, the Council, the creditors, and the foreign delegates waited for her answer. The 6-year structure can protect repair investment, she said, but only if harbour income remains separately accounted. Every bilingual amendment is certified, and no one person controls drafting, custody, and approval. The creditor considered her words. Would you certify a corrected agreement? Not today. Rook laughed once. There is your revenge. Margaret turned toward him. No. She closed the disputed instrument. There is the consequence of discovering that the system cannot yet produce a trustworthy document. Delacroix nodded. My house will negotiate again under those conditions. The harbour master added his agreement. Briggs looked toward Edmund. Then the present signing is cancelled. Edmund reached for the estate seal. He placed it inside its case and locked the lid. The agreement is withdrawn. Rook's composure finally broke. You will lose the warehouses. The oldest creditor looked at him. We will suspend the seizure notices for 48 hours. Rook stared. The creditor continued. We were told refusal meant concealment. He looked toward Margaret. Instead, concealment appears to have been the reason for haste. Rook's gaze moved around the room and found no ally willing to meet it. Edmund called the guards. Mr. Rook will surrender his keys, correspondence, and account authority, pending an independent investigation. Rook straightened. You cannot manage this estate without me. Edmund looked toward Margaret, then corrected himself, before dependence became another theft. This estate will not be managed again by any system that requires one man to remain unquestioned. The guards escorted Rook from the room. He did not confess. He did not need to. The altered document remained on the table, surrounded by every person he had expected to hurry past it. When the doors closed, the oldest creditor addressed Margaret. What structure would allow negotiations to resume? Margaret looked at Edmund. He did not answer for her. She turned toward the harbour, visible through the windows. Not another private arrangement. Her hand rested beside the sealed counterpart. A new agreement requires an office with independent custody, certified translation authority, and the power to stop any document that does not match. Briggs frowned. Who would hold such power? Margaret faced the council that had once sent her to pour tea. That is the first decision this room must learn to make differently. No one answered Margaret immediately. That silence differed from the one at dinner. Then, they had expected her to disappear. Now, they understood that any new agreement would fail unless someone held authority that could not be taken away when her judgment became inconvenient. The oldest creditor closed the disputed contract. I will support an independent review office for the harbour. Briggs looked toward Edmund, under whose appointment Margaret answered before the Duke could. Not under the Duke's appointment alone. Lady Whitcomb stiffened. You propose placing estate authority beyond the head of the estate. I propose preventing one person from controlling the draft, the translation, the seal, and the explanation. Margaret looked toward the locked seal case. That concentration is what brought us here. Delacroix rested one hand on the bilingual counterpart. My house would accept a harbour trust with separate commercial oversight. The harbour master nodded. So would the captains. Briggs looked less certain. A trust requires rules. Yes, Margaret said. Written ones. A few men shifted at the quiet edge in her voice. Edmund did not. What rules, he asked. Margaret faced the table. Every bilingual agreement must be reviewed against an original counterpart. The person certifying the language must keep one sealed copy. No amendment may be added after certification without the signatures of both parties. The harbour accounts must be examined by someone who does not report to the solicitor controlling the contracts. And any certified officer must have the right to halt a signing when the documents do not match. The oldest creditor considered each point. Who selects the officer, the harbour trust? Who dismisses the officer, the trust? After a recorded vote and a stated cause, Margaret looked at Edmund. Not one man in a private room. The Duke accepted the condition without visible resistance. Briggs tapped the table. You speak as though the office already exists. It must exist before another negotiation begins. And you expect to hold it? Margaret met his gaze. I expect the person holding it to possess the skill. Custody. And independence required. That is not an answer. No. Margaret closed the counterpart. It is the first time this council has been required to discuss the work before deciding who deserves the title. Delacroix smiled faintly. The oldest creditor did not. He was thinking about risk. Would you accept the office if the rules were written as you described? Margaret looked through the window. The London coach had already continued without her. Bellamy and Cross might withdraw their offer when she failed to arrive. Ashcombe could offer her a position now, because the harbour needed her. Need could become another form of ownership if she was careless. I will consider a written contract. She said, I will not accept a promise made in this room. Edmund stepped forward. You will have a contract. Margaret turned to him. Prepared by an independent solicitor. Yes. Reviewed by a merchant advocate of my choosing. Yes. My authority will remain valid whether or not I live in this house. Yes. My salary will be paid by the Harbour Trust. Not from your personal household account. Yes. I will hire my own clerks. Yes. I will retain one counterpart of every certified agreement. Yes. And I may refuse any document I have not been allowed to examine from first draft to final seal. Edmund held her chaser. Yes. Lady Whitcomb rose. This is surrender. Margaret looked toward her. No. She rested a hand beside the evidence that had stopped the signing. This is the first agreement today in which the person carrying responsibility may also hold the power required to meet it. The oldest creditor leaned back. I will suspend the warehouse seizure for 14 days, if the trust is established within 48 hours. Briggs looked startled. You offered 2 days. I offered 2 days before learning that Ashcomb's weakness was being manufactured from inside its own office. He glanced toward the doors through which Rook had been removed. The investigation may uncover recoverable funds. Margaret had not forgotten those funds. The harbour charges directed to Mercer Collection House must be frozen. The creditor nodded. I will instruct our agents. Delacroix added that his syndicate would provide every letter exchanged with Rook. The harbour master agreed to preserve the Jews' books. The senior copying clerk would give a recorded statement about the 20-year language. None of those items replaced the counterpart as the decisive proof. They followed from what it had already established. Edmund called Briggs and the oldest creditor to witness the temporary harbour order. The disputed agreement was marked withdrawn. The estate seal remained locked. The bilingual counterpart was returned to Margaret's dispatch case until the independent solicitor could register its custody. Only after the case was closed did Edmund address the council. For 18 months, Mrs. Vale translated our correspondence, corrected our negotiations, and protected this estate from errors we never learned existed. His aunt looked away. Edmund continued. Mr. Rook presented her conclusions under his authority. I saw enough to question that arrangement. I did not question it because it spared me conflict with this council. Margaret watched him speak without asking her to soften the admission. That failure was mine. Lady Whitcomb's face tightened. You acted for the stability of the family. I acted for my comfort inside the family. Edmund looked toward Margaret. I accepted her judgment in private and denied its standing in public. The distinction belonged to her. He did not reshape it into a story of how quickly he had learned. The records will be corrected. Every commercial summary prepared by Mrs. Vale will bear her name. The unpaid difference between her companion's salary and her professional work has already been returned, and the council minutes will state why the signing stopped today. Margaret spoke. The minutes must not say the Duke discovered the altered clause. Edmund nodded. They will state that you did. They must also state that Monsieur Delacroix authenticated the counterpart. Yes. And that the harbour master and creditors heard the comparison before the contract was withdrawn. Yes. She watched him accept each correction. That was accountability. Not a speech. Not regret in an empty corridor. A record that could no longer erase her when the room became comfortable again. The council approved the temporary order before noon. Rook's private correspondence was sealed under 2 independent witnesses. Mercer Collection House was identified as a company controlled by his brother-in-law. Its payments were frozen pending investigation. Rook was barred from estate business and informed that the commercial records would be placed before the proper authorities. He left Ashcombe without confession, apology, or dramatic collapse. The consequence did not require his cooperation. By late afternoon, an independent solicitor arrived from Westmere. Margaret reviewed the proposed trust terms in the same office from which Rook had once locked her out. The new contract named her Director of Harbour Correspondence and Contract Review. It granted certified translation authority, custody rights, hiring authority, an independent salary, and the power to halt any document that failed comparison. The office could not be removed without a recorded vote, and cause. Her right to resign required no permission. Her right to refuse remained explicit. Margaret changed one final sentence. The office would continue even if she rejected residence at Ashcombe or any personal connection with its duke. Edmund read the addition. Then he signed beneath it. He did not ask whether the condition wounded him. He asked whether it protected her choice. "It does," Margaret said. "Then it belongs there." She signed only after her advocate had reviewed every page. The next morning, Bellamy and Cross sent a reply to the message explaining her delay. They did not withdraw their offer. Instead, they gave her 10 days to decide. Margaret now possessed two real futures. One offered distance, certainty, and a clean professional beginning. The other offered authority over the system she had already kept alive, along with the difficult work of changing it. Edmund did not ask her to choose Ashcombe. He ordered no carriage delayed. He kept none of her letters. He had her trunk placed in the Harbour Inn, so that remaining near the estate would not make her a household dependent again. 3 days later, Margaret accepted the Harbour Office for 1 year, subject to review by both sides. She kept the London offer among her private papers, not as a threat, as proof that staying was still a choice. At sunset, Edmund visited the Harbour Office. He stopped at the open door. Margaret sat behind a desk bearing her name. 2 new clerks worked in the adjoining room. The sealed counterpart rested inside a cabinet for which she held the principal key. "May I come in?" he asked. Margaret looked up. "Yes." He entered but did not approach the desk until she closed the letter before her. The trust approved the new accounting rules. He said, "I saw the vote. The creditors released the Western warehouses. I saw that as well." Edmund nodded. He had not come to deliver information she already possessed. Margaret waited. "I asked you once if I might write to you in London." "You did." "You told me not yet." "Yes." He looked toward the harbour beyond her window. "I would like to ask again." Margaret studied him. "The contract is signed." "It remains signed if your answer is no." "My office remains independent." "It does. You will not interpret permission to write as permission to direct my time." "I will not." "And you will not call gratitude affection?" "No." His answer carried no injured pride, only attention. Margaret removed a blank sheet from the stack beside her. "1 letter," she said. "You may begin with the truth." Edmund's expression softened. "Which truth? That you noticed my value long after you benefited from it." He accepted the condition. "And after that ask a question." He smiled then, but did not move closer. Margaret felt no need to decide the rest of her life before the lamps were lit. She had standing that did not depend on love. She had work that bore her name. She had an open road she had chosen not to lose. Only then was romance free to begin. Would you have returned with the proof after finally receiving a real chance to leave?